Yeah, welcome everybody to our Friday lecture series here at PKU, our international lecture series. I'm very excited to be able to introduce Olle Blomberg to you, who will give a lecture today. Olle Blomberg is a senior researcher at the Department of Philosophy, Linguistics, and Theory of Science at the University of Gothenburg. His work focuses on issues in action theory, collective intentionality, and moral responsibility and philosophy of mind. And through many publications in the most prestigious philosophical journals, such as Mind and Language and Philosophical Studies, to name just a few, he has shaped our understanding of human social interaction. And to name just a few of his noteworthy advancements, he has defended the possibility of group obligations. He has presented influential arguments against common knowledge requirements in the context of joint action. And he has advanced our understanding of the extended mind thesis by reflecting on its practical significance. And in his talk today, he will explain how an agent can be morally responsible for someone else's intentional actions. So I'll leave the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Julius, for the invitation and also for the generous introduction. And thanks everyone for showing up to this. So I think maybe, I don't know if Julius sent out a handout earlier for the talk, but there was a few mistakes in that, which I hope didn't confuse you. So I will share in the chat an updated handout now, and I think you should be able to download it. And I will also share this handout on the screen. So if you can't download it for some reason, it's not a big problem. Mm-hmm. And I hope you can hear me clearly, and you know, I hope I don't talk too fast or something. If so, you know, let me know. Right. So I will now share the screen. So can you now see the handout and hopefully also myself? Let's see. Good. Okay. Right. So yeah, so the topic I'm going to talk about is, or the question I'm going to talk about is whether one agent can be more responsible for another agent's free and
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't really see the screen right now.
Okay.
There's a problem with the screen share. It was
yeah.
Okay. Now it works.
Okay. It's okay.
Sorry for interrupting.
I see what the problem is. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So as I said, the question is whether one agent can be more responsible for another agent's free and intentional action. And I mean, in one, and this is a topic I've been working on for the last sort of on and off for the last 1.5 years. So I think in one sense, most people, both philosophers and lay people, will think that there is some sense in which an agent can be more responsible for another agent's free and intentional action. So for example, you might think that there's a sense in which parents can be more responsible for their children's intentional actions, pre-adult age. Or you might think that a general can be more responsible for the actions that they command their soldiers to perform. Or you might think that it seems plausible that I would be more responsible for someone else's action if I coerce them or threaten them to perform an action. Or perhaps if I deceive them or otherwise manipulate them in some sense. But it's a very common view both in analytic philosophy and among people in general, I think, to think that when it comes to free and intentional actions, one agent can't be more responsible for those actions in the same way that she's more responsible for her own free and intentional actions. So this is a common view, and there are sort of various variations of this view. And on the handout, there's a list of different views that in various ways hold on to this thesis, this common view. I won't go through them, but if you want to if you're interested, you can follow up these references, and you can also ask me questions about it in the Q&A. Also, feel free to email me afterwards if you have any questions about this. Okay, so my claim then is that an agent can be fully, although not solely, more responsible for another agent's free and intentional action in the relevantly same way that she's more responsible for her own free and intentional actions. That's the claim I'm going to argue for. I should say that what I'm talking about here is not so Julius mentioned in the introduction that I've written about collective responsibility and group obligations and things like that. But what I'm talking about here is really individual responsibility, although it happens to be individual responsibility for someone else's actions. So it's a different topic, but there is a relation because I think if we can give an account of how an individual agent can be more responsible for someone else's action, then we can also give an account of how several agents can each be more responsible for a joint action. So there is a connection, but today, the topic is individual responsibility. Okay, now it might be sort of a little bit hard to grasp exactly what my claim here amounts to. So I will illustrate the claim by giving these two contrast cases. And these cases are sort of loosely inspired by an American TV series which is called The Wire. I have no idea whether it's been shown in China or whether you've seen it, but it doesn't really matter if you have, although it might perhaps be slightly kind of easier to grasp quickly if you've seen it. But anyway, the sort of key case that I will be using is this case of non-manipulative influence. So there's three important characters here. There's Stringer, which is the first agent, and then there's Omar, which is the agent that performs an action and wrongdoing. He kills the victim Mousson. Right. So the case is this, and now I'm reading from the handout. So Stringer, he desires and intends Mousson to be killed. He also happens to know that Mousson murdered Omar's beloved, Omar's partner. However, Omar, who's a notorious stick-up man, so someone who robs drug dealers and takes their money and drugs, so that's from the TV series. So Omar, he mistakenly thinks that his beloved's death was actually the result of an accidental fall from a high balcony. But knowing what sort of person Omar is, Stringer knows that if he reveals to Omar that his beloved was actually murdered by Mousson, then Omar will very likely decide to kill Mousson and will, with a very high probability, succeed in doing so. So Mousson knows that Omar is this very vengeful person. And he knows that, let's suppose he knows also that Omar will trust his information. So with the intent to bring about Muson's death, Stringer reveals to Omar the true cause of his beloved's death, and that the murderer is Muson, or sorry, yeah, is Muson. So when he receives this information, just as Stringer predicted, Omar tracks Muson down. He aims a handgun at him and he pulls the trigger. The bullet hits Muson, who dies immediately. Right, so that's sort of the central case. So I hope it makes sense. It's a bit complicated, but it's sort of, that's necessary to get the right intuitions, I think. Now contrast this with the case of lone killer, which is much simpler. So Stringer desires and intends Muson to be killed. He tracks down Muson, aims a handgun at him, and pulls the trigger, and the bullet hits Muson, who dies immediately. Right, so my claim then is basically that Stringer is fully responsible for the killing of Muson in the relevantly same way in these two cases. Of course, there can be, this is other things being equal, there might be differences that aren't described here that make a difference to his responsibility and blameworthiness, but there's nothing that stops Muson from being as responsible for the killing in non-manipulative influence as in lone killer. That's the claim. And well, maybe I should say something about why this is significant. So, well, one reason that I mentioned is that it will give us an account of one type of collective responsibility. I think it also can sort of correct a picture, this common view, which I think might distort our practice of holding agents responsible and blaming them. So just by knowing who did it doesn't mean that we know who to hold responsible and who to blame. It might also have legal implications for legal responsibility. So in most jurisdictions, certainly in Sweden, where I live, Stringer would, in non-manipulative influence, he would not be charged as a perpetrator. Perhaps he could be charged as an accomplice, as someone who helps Omar or instigates the crime or something like that. But this would be a different kind of legal liability. But if I'm right, and if legal responsibility should sort of track more responsibility, then the law should arguably change here. Okay, so that's why this might be interesting, besides the kind of pure theoretical idea. Okay, so why should you then accept this claim? Well, I mean, the sort of the basic argument is just that it's implied, I think, by plausible sufficient conditions for when someone is more responsible for an action. So that's the basic claim. So the way I will do this is that I will give a sort of very quick and dirty argument for why I think my claim is true, and then I will try to strengthen it by going through a few objections to this argument and respond to them. But first, I should say a few things about, as a preliminary, say something about moral responsibility, which is a term that is used in different ways. So in the handout, in the text, it just says responsible, but you should read that as morally responsible. So what is moral responsibility? Well, I think of moral responsibility as a relation between an agent and an action, or perhaps an outcome, or it could be an omission, perhaps an attitude But in the sort of central case and in the cases I discuss here, the idea is that if an agent is more responsible for an action, then she stands in a relation to that action, which makes her a potential candidate for blame and praise for that action. So this means that since it's a potential candidate for praise and blame, sorry, I should turn off my mail client here. Yeah, so the way I use moral responsibility, I could be more responsible for an action which is entirely neutral, morally neutral. So, you know, if I squeeze my finger, in normal cases, I will be more responsible for squeezing my finger, even if it doesn't have any bad or good consequences, right? And so this might be a bit counterintuitive, I don't know, but this is just a kind of terminological decision, right? But if I'm holding a gun and I'm squeezing the finger around the trigger and I kill someone and this has a bad consequence, then because I'm standing in the moral responsibility relation to this action, I will be blameworthy for it as well. So that's how I use moral responsibility. And then exactly what conditions this that needs to be fulfilled for me to be more responsible for an action, that's something I, for the purpose of this talk at least, want to be as neutral about as possible. Although I can't be entirely neutral. Right, so I think on fairly mainstream views, I need to, in order to be more responsible, I need to fulfill some kind of control or freedom condition. So the squeezing of my finger needs to be guided by my reasons for action. It can't be an action that's coerced by someone else or manipulated by brain surgeons or something like that. Sorry. And I also need to fulfill some kind of knowledge or epistemic condition. So if it's the case that I'm holding a gun and squeezing my finger, I need to know that this action has the consequence, or that it's likely that it has the consequence that I will kill someone, for example, in order to be blameworthy for the action. And I must also have some kind of normative competence, probably, that I understand that this is the morally wrong thing to do. There might be other conditions as well. Perhaps I need to fulfill a quality of will condition so that my action somehow manifests disrespect for other people, which seems plausible if I shoot someone. But for the purpose of this talk and the issue I'm discussing, I don't think I need to go into details about exactly what the right conditions are. But there's something which is important, which is a distinction that is common in the literature between direct responsibility and indirect responsibility. And here, I mean, what I've written here on the handout, it's pretty close to what Carolina Sartorio sort of says in her book Causation and Free Will. But it's sort of similar. Similar distinctions are made by many other philosophers in this literature. So so I'm directly responsible for an action only if this action is something I'm directly in control over. So it's something that I don't control by performing some other action. So I'm directly controlling, I think, my finger movements, but not the firing of the gun. I'm controlling the firing of the gun by directly controlling my finger movement. Some people think that actually I'm not directly controlling my finger movement even, I'm just directly controlling my willing to move my finger and so on. So one can have different views on this. Perhaps I'm only in direct control of the decision to squeeze my finger. Anyway, there are some things I'm in direct control over. So in the cases I discussed, Stringer is directly responsible probably for squeezing his finger in Lone Killer, for example. Right, but the idea here is that I can also be indirectly responsible. So if I'm directly responsible for something and I can foresee that this action will, and perhaps I intend this action to cause some result, then I'm also indirectly responsible for that result. So Stringer is responsible for killing Musone in Lone Killer because he's directly responsible for squeezing his finger, and he can foresee and he intends that action to cause Musone's death, right? So there's a kind of causal transmission of responsibility. And there's also this causal transmission of blameworthiness. So if I am blameworthy for squeezing my finger because I foresee that this will cause this harm, it will kill someone, and this action actually cause that result that I foresee or intend, then I will also be blameworthy for the result that the person dies. So this is the case in Lone Killer for Stringer. So he foresees and intends his squeezing of the finger to cause Musone's death, and that actually happens. So therefore, he's also responsible for the killing. That's the idea. Now, I said I wanted to be. So I think this is something that many people will. These distinctions are kind of uncontroversial, except there is a big sort of controversial assumption here, which is that I assume that there is moral outcome luck. So I can be responsible for things that I'm not in direct control over. So this means that I think that if Stringer, so this is an example, I think this is an example from Thomas Nagel, or a similar example from Thomas Nagel. So if Stringer in Lone Killer, if he shoots the gun and it just happens that there's a bird that crosses the bullet's path and Musone doesn't die, then if you don't think that there is moral outcome luck, then you will think that you're equally blameworthy and blameworthy for the same things, whether or not the bullet hits the target and kills the person. So the idea is, I mean, roughly, whether you succeed or whether what you're doing is just an unsuccessful attempt doesn't itself make a difference to what you're responsible for or what you're blameworthy for. But I will sort of, this is a deep, very difficult issue, but I think that there is moral outcome luck, and I will just kind of take for granted that there is moral outcome luck. I mean, if you don't think that there is moral outcome luck, then it sort of obviously follows that you won't be more responsible for other agents' actions, because you will only be responsible for something like your bodily movements or your willings. So for this kind of argument, that's in a sense a non-starter. Okay, so that was some preliminaries. So here's the quick and dirty argument. So it's very simple. The idea is just that in both these cases, Stringer has an intention to kill Musone, and he can reasonably foresee that his intention will sort of initiate a causal chain that will lead to Muson's death. And he's not directly responsible for killing Stringer for the outcome, where this includes the outcome that Muson will die in either of these cases. So he's only directly responsible for something like a bodily movement, and in virtue of that and his ability to foresee what's going to happen, he's more responsible for Muson's death in both cases. So it seems that the sort of causal structure is similar, except that in one case there's an intervening autonomous agent, which is Omar. But if there is this transmission of responsibility and blameworthiness that I think is plausible, then it doesn't seem like there's a there's no obvious relevant difference here. Right. So that's the kind of quick and dirty argument. And now I will try to strengthen this by going through objections to this quick and dirty argument, and hopefully convince you, and then you can raise some other objections, and we'll see what happens. Okay, one objection is simply to say that, well, maybe there is this transmission of this kind of causal transmission of responsibility and blameworthiness, but I mean, in many cases, so there is that transmission in lone killer, but not in non-manipulative influence, because when an agent acts freely on a certain libertarian view of free will, actually there will be a break in the causal chain in non-manipulative influence, because a free action is an action that's up to an agent, and when an action is up to an agent, it's the result of a non-caused decision. It's a decision that's determined but not causally determined. It's rather rationally determined, or determined by the agent's practical reasoning, or something like that. So if this sort of view is right, then it looks like either Muson doesn't cause the killing, and therefore he's not more responsible for it, because the transmission of responsibility is kind of cut short, or else Omar doesn't act freely, because if his action is caused, it's not a free action. That's the idea. So I think there are lots of problems, I should say, with this view of free will, where free will is this control condition for moral responsibility. But for the purpose of this talk, we can sort of assume that something like this is right. But I think that doesn't establish that there's a relevant difference between these cases. And in a nice paper by Justin Capes from 2017, he, I think, convincingly shows that even if it's true that in order for an action to be free, it must be up to the agent in this libertarian way, it can still be the case that a causal chain goes through another agent, so that the causal transmission of responsibility is kind of established. I mean, that's not exactly what Justin Capes argues, but I think it kind of follows from what he says. So, and I will just sort of illustrate this with this case. So, a sort of variation of the case non-manipulative influence. So suppose that Stringer puts a deadly poison in Muson's food, and Omar has an antidote, and it is up to him. So he has this non-causal free will. It's up to him whether to allow or to prevent Stringer's act to become a cause of Muson's death. He can make the free decision to give the antidote to Muson, or he can make the free decision not to give the antidote to him. Now it seems that this this doesn't change the fact that Muson's act can be a cause of, Stringer's act can be a cause of Muson's death. So even on this libertarian view, it doesn't look like causation will be, transmission of this responsibility will be stopped. Now it might be that this makes the causal chain indeterministic. That's possible, but that doesn't itself exclude that this indeterministically caused result can be foreseen and intended by Stringer. So some reasonable degree of foreseeability seems to be sufficient for the transmission of responsibility and blameworthiness. Okay, so that's sort of what I want to say about that objection. I just think it doesn't establish that there's a relevant difference here. And also, I think there's lots of problems with this view of free will. Yeah, we can discuss that in the Q&A if you want. Now, okay, so Stringer's action can cause Muson's death. So there can be this transmission of responsibility from his intention to Omar's action in non-manipulative influence. But you might think that there's still a kind of important difference in the causal structure here between these two cases. And a few people have argued that something that distinguishes an agent's control, that the control that the agent has over her actions, is that actions, or the results of her actions, is that intentions robustly cause their intended effects. So if there are various kinds of obstacles in your way, you will adapt and bring about the result anyway. Not always, but in a robust way. So this is very plausible, I think, and I think it sort of follows from the science of action control as well. And then a further idea here is to tie this to moral responsibility. So you might think that to be fully responsible for something, you need to have this kind of robust causation that is a characteristic of human agency. And another way of putting this, which is a way of putting it that Oysen Deary and Edinamius have put it, is that you're only more responsible for an action or result if you're the causal source of it. And they define being a causal source as being as your intention being the prior event that most robustly causes an effect, right? Now, so this is a similar idea, but slightly different. Now, what is robust causation? So this is an idea that comes from a paper by David Lewis. I think it's just called causation, if I remember correctly. And well, the idea is this: one event, C1, causes another event, E1, more robustly or insensitively than event C2 causes E2 if the range of nearby possible worlds in which C1 causes E1 is wider than that in which C2 causes E2. So to illustrate this, I mean, with respect to Omar, Moson, and Stringer, so you might think that, you know, if Omar, given that Omar has the intention to kill Moson, various things can happen, but he will still find ways to carry out his actions successfully. So suppose a policeman shows up by Muson's house when he's seeking out Moson, then he will, you know, maybe wait until the next day, or he will find ways to distract this policemen and so on. Or, you know, if he has a headache or something, he will take a painkiller. Various things can happen that will obstruct him from successfully carrying out his action, and he can adapt to it. So in a wide range of nearby possible worlds to the actual world where he kills Mousson, he will still kill Mousson because of this flexibility of his agency. Right, so Omar robustly causes the death of Mousson. What about Stringer? Well, you might think here that Stringer's intention doesn't as robustly cause Mousson's death because, well, Omar might change his plan, for example, or in various nearby possible worlds, Omar is not quite as vengeful as Stringer thinks he is. So perhaps he won't kill Mousson. He will go to the police instead. Or, you know, perhaps Omar is in nearby possible worlds afraid of the police, so he will change his plan when he sees the policeman. So various things can happen, right? Where the causal chain from Stringer's intention to Mousson's death is disrupted in nearby possible worlds. Okay. So sort of generalizing from this, you might think that an intervening agent generally is a very sensitive causal system whose behavior is determined by a host of beliefs, desires that can shift in various ways when you move to nearby possible worlds. So generally, this intervening free agent will make the causal chain from the first agent's intention to the result very insensitive in such a way that you don't get full responsibility. So I take it that this sort of argument would follow from the views of people like Marius Usher that I referred to here, and also Derry and Oystein Derry and Eddie Namis. Okay, and so that's an objection. And I think that actually this sort of the response to this is, you can find that already in David Lewis' paper. So David Lewis points out that the connection between robust causation on the one hand and this control required for full moral responsibility, there is this connection, but it's contingent and foreseeable. I mean, the idea is that if something robustly causes something else, then in general, you will be able to foresee it. And that is what is important for moral responsibility. So I think what matters for moral responsibility is foreseeability rather than insensitive or robust causation itself. And to illustrate this, I think, well, first here's cases where intervening agency doesn't give you robust causation. Well, so you can imagine that Omar is his core, at his core, he's very vengeful, he's very trusting to testimony. So in a wide range of possible worlds, he will still believe what Stringer tells him, and he will also seek revenge. So that doesn't itself, so it doesn't seem like the intervening agency itself has to make the causal link very sensitive. Although this doesn't show that Mousson can be the causal source of the killing, but anyway, the causation can be robust. We can also imagine a case where, I mean, somewhat fanciful, but suppose that Mousson tells 10 different agents, Mousson or Omar and, no, sorry, Stringer tells Omar and 9 other agents this information that Mousson killed this very popular person, and all of them seek out to revenge this death. In this case, it looks like the causal chain that might run through a particular agent will be very sensitive. So that agent will introduce sensitivity to that particular causal chain. But the chain from Stringer's intention to the death of Mousson will be very robust, because there are all these agents that are trying to carry out this killing, right? So, so in this case, Stringer would plausibly also be the causal source of the killing, even though the intervening agents are acting freely, autonomously, and so on. Okay, so another thing is that I think we can have full moral responsibility also without robust causation, because what matters here is foreseeability rather than robust causation itself. So here's a so-called writing prompt from the website Reddit. So writing prompt is something that people use to sort of generate ideas for a short story or something like that. So one writing prompt that I saw on Reddit is the following: you are a serial killer who uses Rube Goldberg machines to kill his victims. Now, a Rube Goldberg, so Rube Goldberg was an American cartoonist who drew these like very intricate contraptions for doing very simple things. And I have an image of one on the last page here. So here's a Rube Goldberg machine for using a napkin, right? So so suppose this person wants to wipe his face with the napkin, then he can sort of operate this machine with hand. And it looks like in this case, in a lot of nearby possible worlds, these actions that go through these intricate contraptions will, the causal chain will not result in the action being successful. So you have a case where, intuitively at least, it looks like the causal chain is very insensitive, but it still seems like you will be more responsible for using this machine and for bringing about the intended effect. Right, and I also think there's a case in the literature on moral responsibility in the discussion about whether manipulation undermines moral responsibility or not, which it seems like most people intuitively think involves a manipulating agent being more responsible for an action that's where the causal chain is extremely sensitive. So you might, I don't know if you know this literature, but you might have come across this zygote case that the philosopher Al Miele has. But in this case, so this is a sort of version of the case, but with the names changed to suit my cases. So suppose that there's this supremely intelligent being, something like a god, and this is Stringer. So Stringer assembles a zygote with a particular constitution because he wants and intends Mousson to die in 30 years. So from his knowledge of the state of the universe just prior to him creating the zygote and the laws of nature of the deterministic universe in which he is in, he deduces that a zygote with this constitution in a particular woman's womb will develop into a fetus which will be born and grow to become Omar, who in 30 years' time will intentionally kill Mousson to revenge the murder of his partner. And as predicted, 30 years later, Omar tracks down Musone, aims a handgun at him and pulls the trigger, and he dies. Now, it seems intuitively, given if we allow that there are these supremely intelligent beings that can have this knowledge and make these precise predictions, it seems intuitively that Stringer will be more responsible for this action of killing Musone, even though the causal chain will be extremely sensitive, right? It's like super sensitive, presumably. So Stringer sees this opportunity that if he can change the zygote in a particular way, it will result in the death. So I mean, this is a kind of science fiction case, and you might not agree with the intuition, but at least in this debate, a lot of people seem to just take for granted that the manipulator here is more responsible. Okay, so I don't think that I think there's something right with this objection, because robust causation do generally lead to foreseeability, but it's a contingent sort of connection, and I think in a case like non-manipulative influence, it seems to me that knowledge of what sort of person Omar is would suffice for getting the foreseeability that grounds moral responsibility. Okay, so another objection then, which draws on this distinction between direct and indirect responsibility, which I introduced earlier. So so you might think that, well, what I've shown so far is that an agent can be more responsible for bringing about an outcome that another agent will perform an action. So Stringer can be more responsible for bringing about the outcome that Omar kills Musone, but that's different from saying that Stringer is more responsible for the action itself. And this sort of distinction, I think, follows from a view of action which is often taken for granted in the moral responsibility literature, and it's very influential. This is a view that comes from philosopher Donald Davidson. So in his view, all actions are actually bodily movements, or you might think that they're willings or something like that. And you can describe these actions using descriptions that refer to consequences of those movements. So, you know, when I squeeze the finger, you can refer to this squeezing of the finger. If I hold a gun and shoot someone who dies, you can refer to this squeezing of the finger by saying Olle's killing of this person, right? But what you're actually referring to is the squeezing of my finger, nothing more than that. So if this view of action is correct, then Stringer isn't more responsible for Omar's killing of Musone in non-manipulative influence. Sorry. So he's not responsible for that in the way that he's responsible for his own action, his own bodily movement, when he moves his mouth, when he tells Omar this true information. Now, I think this is in a way, this is a good response. I think given that this view of action is right, or a view of this kind is right, which I think is plausible, then this does indeed follow. But I think this this kind of formal action theoretic distinction here, it's very easy to think that this is morally significant, but I don't think it is. So, and I think it's easy to think that it is morally significant because there is a kind of mundane distinction between being more responsible for an outcome and being morally responsible for an action, which we typically use to so we typically talk about more responsibility for outcomes when people have been reckless or negligent, rather than when they're intentionally producing an outcome. And we talk about responsibility for actions when they intentionally produce outcomes. So, for example, to illustrate, suppose that Mousson had a bodyguard who fell asleep at his post when Omar or Stringer was trying to kill him, and Mousson dies. Then someone else might say to this bodyguard, Mousson is dead and it's your fault. They probably wouldn't say that he killed Mousson, right? So I think this mundane distinction, I mean, I don't think it's always the case, but typically there is this mundane distinction which is morally significant. And people also talk about, well, I don't have, if you're interested in this, I mean, there's this discussion of tracing cases where, you know, how can a drunk driver be responsible for killing the pedestrians when he's drunk so he can't control his actions? Well, and control is a condition of moral responsibility. Then a lot of people say, well, we can trace this responsibility back to the reckless or negligent action of drinking too much earlier in the bar. So here, and here people say that we have a case of indirect responsibility, it's not direct. And that seems like many people think that this seems morally significant, right? That it's worse if it's direct than indirect. But I think this is a mistake, because these tracing cases are almost always recklessness and negligence cases. But suppose that the driver got drunk intending to kill pedestrians, sort of just driving wildly while drunk home to kill pedestrians, then it doesn't seem like this would be a sort of second-class moral responsibility, even though it's a case of indirect responsibility. Okay, so, and another reason why people might think this looks relevant is that, well, yeah, so sorry. So one reason is just that people conflate this sort of mundane distinction with the technical distinction. But it seems obvious to me that when we hold someone like Stringer responsible for killing Mousson, we're not focusing on his bodily movement. We're not interested in whether he squeezed his right or his left finger. We're not, I mean, of course, we might be interested in exactly what happened, but for the purposes of holding him responsible and blaming him, what's relevant here is that he intentionally brought about Mousson's death, not that he moved his body in a particular way, right? That's not the focus of our practice. Okay, so finally, the last objection. So I sort of think my claim still stands. So finally, there's an objection that's not really about, it's not about the metaphysics of action or about sort of moral responsibility theory, but rather a kind of normative objection that, well, we should adopt a sort of normative policy here, a moral normative policy that if there is this intervening free intentional agent, then that severes a kind of moral connection between the first agent and the death, in my case, the death of Mousson, right? And this is very common in, as I mentioned earlier, in many legal doctrines. I mean, I have no idea what the law in China is like. If you have information about that would be very interesting. But something like this is true in Sweden, and I think also in German law, and in which has influenced Swedish law a lot, and in US and UK law, for example. So there is this, so this has been referred to as the autonomy doctrine. And here is Glenwell Williams' characterization of this doctrine. So the first actor who starts on a dangerous or criminal plan will often be responsible for what happens if no one else intervenes. But the subsequent actor who has reached responsible years, is of sound mind, has full knowledge of what he's doing, and is not acting under intimidation or other pressure or stress resulting from the defendant's conduct, that kind of agent replaces him as the responsible actor. So in non-manipulative influence, Omar is that kind of agent, and he would replace Stringer as the responsible actor for the crime. So such an intervening agent is thought to break the moral connection that would otherwise have been perceived between the defendant's acts and the forbidden consequence. Now, so I think this is, I think there's something intuitive about this, but it's really hard, I think, to justify it. And so I think when it comes to moral responsibility, at least, this autonomy doctrine should be rejected. And the way I want to sort of argue against this autonomy doctrine objection is just to sort of compare the case with two cases. And since I'm running out of time here, I'll just focus on one of these cases. But so take the deception case here. So the case is this. So this deception case is a case where I think the autonomy doctrine wouldn't hold because of the deception. And it seems to me that there isn't any morally relevant difference between deception and non-manipulative influence. Okay, so the deception case is this. Stringer is a powerful and ruthless acting leader of a criminal organization who desires and intends Mousson to be killed. Stringer desires and intends Mousson to be killed, not the criminal organization necessarily. He knows that the beloved of the notorious stick-up man Omar has died as a result of accidentally falling from a high balcony. So in this case, that's actually what happened. But knowing what sort of person Omar is, Stringer knows that if he deceives Omar into thinking that his beloved was actually murdered by Mousson, then Omar will decide to kill Mousson and will, with a very high probability, succeed in doing so. So with intent to bring about Mousson's death, Stringer provides fabricated evidence to Omar, which convincingly frames Mousson as a murderer of his beloved's death. As predicted, Omar decides to kill Mousson upon receiving the fabricated evidence. Omar tracks Mousson down, aims a handgun at him, and pulls the trigger. The bullet hits Mousson, who dies immediately. Now, so I think it's not super clear what sort of the legal responsibility is here in different countries, but there are these kind of cases of deception where the first agent would be treated as a perpetrator. So in Swedish law and also in German law, there's this something called the perpetrator behind the perpetrator, the tater behind the tater. No, der Täter hinter den Täter, or something like that. Well, Julius can correct me about that, but anyway, there is this kind of allowance for when you have this kind of deception, then the first agent will be treated as a perpetrator. So what's the relevant difference here between this case and non-manipulative influence? Of course, you might think that Stringer does something additional wrong here when he deceives Omar into doing this. We might express it by saying that he's using Omar as a tool. by not being truthful, but insofar as we're interested in Stringer's moral responsibility for the killing, it doesn't seem like there's a relevant moral difference here. What's relevant is, you know, his control of what's happening, his ability to foresee what's going to happen, maybe his quality of will, his knowledge that this is right or wrong. And then you have this transmission of responsibility along the causal chain. So it doesn't seem to me that as far as Stringer is concerned, there's no difference here. But one might think that, so I think this is the kind of explanation here, what might be going on. So one might think that because Omar's responsibility in the deception case seems to be, because it's being sort of used as a tool in some sense, his responsibility seems to be diminished. Maybe, I mean, I'm not sure, but you might have that intuition, and then you might think, well, this makes room for Stringer being more responsible. So maybe a reasoning like that is behind this autonomy doctrine. But I think this reasoning depends on a model of responsibility and blameworthiness, which is mistaken. So this is a kind of pie model where you have a sort of fixed amount of blameworthiness for wrongdoing, and this amount needs to be distributed so that if one is less blameworthy, then another can be more blameworthy. But I think we have this psychological tendency to think in this way, but I think there's no good, as far as I know. I mean, I'm interested in whether you have any thoughts on this, but I can't see any good reason to think that this pie model is correct. And if it's not correct, I don't see why there would be a relevant difference between deception and non-manipulative influence. Okay, so that's the fourth sort of objection. And with that, I'm done. So given that none of these objections work, I think my claim here that an agent can be fully but not solely responsible for another agent's free and intentional action if she intentionally created the conditions for it, that's true. And this is typically how she's more responsible for her own actions as well. Her own actions in this sort of mundane sense, not in the technical Davidsonian sense. Okay, so I hope you could follow that, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ole, for this wonderful talk. If you want to unshare your screen for a minute.
Yeah.
Then...
Oh, yeah, sure. So could you see me while I was talking as well, or was it
yes,
just?
I could.
Okay.
Yes. So, okay, great. Thank you so much for your talk. And we have about an hour for question and answer, for Q&A. And there's two ways in which you can ask a question. You could either directly turn your microphone on and ask a question after raising a hand in the reactions with the reactions button of Zoom. Raise your hand and then ask a question or write a question in the chat box, which I'm then just going to read out after you wrote the question in the chat box. So there's these two ways: raise your hand and say something, or write a question in the chat box. Both are fine. And we already have a question by Wu Yu or Wu Yu. If you could unmute yourself, great.
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your very interesting talk. And I have two questions. The first one is about the causal transmission chain of the responsibility. It seems that in all of these cases, stringer is always the first cause of the chain, and if the responsibility could be transmitted, then is there any possible that the chain will be an infinite regressive process? And I don't know what defines the first cause, which has no other causal conditions. This is the first one.
Yep.
Okay. The second one is about maybe about the first objection about the free agency, and I'm not sure that is there any difference between the original version of this story and the poison food story, because in the original version, it seems that if Stringer told Omar the truth, then is there a possibility that he or she will freely decide another way to behavior? For example, he might choose to shoot Muzong or not, and but I'm confused in the poisoned food version. Why you say that in the poisoned food version, Omar seems more free or have more autonomy, more free decisions for his behavior. I want to know how to make quantification of the probability causal influence to the motive of the agent, because for different people, for example, somebody might choose to revenge as his normal behavior, but for some other people, they will come down and do something else. Does that will lead to the moral relativism in this case? Okay, this is the second one. Thank you.
That's two great questions. I mean, I will try to answer them. So yeah, so I mean, in a way, your first question is whether, yeah, if there is this causal transmission of responsibility, doesn't that sort of imply an infinite regress because you need to find the first cause or something like that? Yeah, so I don't think it really, I don't think this idea that responsibility transmit causally in the way I've suggested, that doesn't require that there is a first cause, right? Because I'm not saying that it's only the agent which is the first cause which is more responsible. So I think both Stringer and Omar will be fully more responsible, other things being equal, for the killing of Muzong in non-manipulative influence. But I guess what you're saying is that, yeah, so in a way, I think it's not a threat to moral responsibility that there are sort of prior agents which are also causes of our actions. I mean, that's my conclusion. But I guess I sense that you're worried that because of this causal transmission, there won't be any more responsibility at all. Is that the underlying worry? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a big topic. I mean, I don't have my inclinations are sort of compatibilist, so I think that moral responsibility is compatible with causal determinism. but I do want my argument to be independent of that. So yeah, but this is good. So I need to. So I think this transmission of responsibility and blameworthiness, I think that should be possible without having causal determinism. At least as long as you have causes, a causal chain, it doesn't have to be deterministic causation. It can be indeterministic as well. But, and this leads to the second question. Yeah, you have to have some basis for being able to foresee that your actions will cause certain results. So, and then your second question was about whether these two cases are really analogous. The case where Omar can prevent or allow the poison to do its work, and the case where he can decide whether to kill Muson or not. Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, so the point with the poison example was just to show that the fact that there's a kind of non-causal agency in the middle of a chain, causal chain, doesn't prevent the causal chain from holding, so to speak. But you're right that the cases aren't quite the same. But my idea was that just as the decision whether or not to give Muson the antidote, I mean, I was thinking that would be analogous to Omar's decision whether or not to decide to kill Muson. I'm not really making any progress. I was thinking that those are analogous, but I mean, can you say a bit more why you think they're different? Is it because it's a kind of omission in one case, and so in the
I think they are not so much difference because Omar who knows that who knew the truth, then she decided to kill Muson by shooting.
Yeah.
Is
Right.
that very similar as the case of poisoned food?
Yeah, okay, see. Yeah, so I agree that there's a difference with respect to Omar's responsibility in these two cases. Yeah. But yeah, so I wouldn't deny that. I mean, other things being equal, it seems that there's a difference. But I don't think, I mean, what I'm focusing on is Stringer's responsibility, the first agent, not Omar's responsibility. So if we just kind of bracket what Omar is responsible for, it doesn't seem to me that the fact that there's this free libertarian free agent in the causal chain doesn't itself block the transmission of responsibility, as long as the first agent can foresee that with some probability that the result will come about causally. Yeah. So, but then you had this question about quantifying the probability and sort of what the if there's an objective criteria for how probable it has to be and things like that. Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. I don't have an answer off the top of my head. It's good question for further research. So
Okay.
I'm sorry
Thank
if you
for
have any
making me
suggestions.
thinking.
But of course it does have to be fairly I mean, I think if it's very, very unlikely, so it's just a kind of purely accidental thing, it wouldn't sort of, the causal chain would be too insensitive, I think. Yeah. So it has to be some robustness to it, but I can't say exactly what level. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take the questions in order. So there's two chat questions, and then we get to the second hand. So I'm going to read out the first one. I think it's a clarificatory question. I read as follows. How to prove that the person is responsible for another's intentional action? In the example, Stringer must have said things to Omar, providing information to him. However, how to prove that other people did not say relevant things to Omar, or Omar did not doubt Mouzon at all in the first place?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is a good point, I guess. That so if you think, especially if you think about the legal responsibility and this legal autonomy doctrine, epistemic considerations, what we have generally can have reliable evidence about, will be very relevant, right? And you might think that one reason for this autonomy doctrine, for sort of excluding the first agent as the responsible agent, is that in general it will be harder to have evidence of both that they're a cause and that they had the required intent. I suppose that's kind of what, I mean, I might be wrong, but if that's what the question is about, I agree that this will be relevant. And of course, a similar thing will hold for moral responsibility. So, or for holding moral responsible, often it will, I mean, in general, it will be our evidence that are required for being justified in holding others more responsible will depend on having good evidence. And you might think that, yeah, I mean, it's much clearer in a case like Lone Killer, where Stringer just shoots Mouzon, that he is the one, that he is fully moral responsible. But yeah, I mean, my response is just that I don't think that doesn't, that says something about how we should hold people responsible, what sort of policies we should have. But I think it doesn't mean that if we have the required evidence, then the first agent can be just as more responsible for the killing as the second agent. And if we have the evidence, we should hold them responsible in the same way. I hope that's
great.
Makes sense.
Great, thanks for this answer. I should say that for example, the participant River Cheng, if you have a follow-up, I think it's best if you just turn your microphone on and then say what you have to say in the follow-up questions. Otherwise, if there's no follow-up, we'll go on with the queue. I think that's best practice. Okay, so that's for all chat questions. Follow-ups, I think, are best in person. Otherwise, it gets a little too messy in the chat. Let me read one more chat question to just go sort of by how those questions appeared. It is known that selling too much Coke to the public can lead to overdrinking in some people, resulting in diabetes and death. Many businesses also know this fact. So are Coca-Cola and its distributors committing murder?
Okay, that's a good. Yeah, right. So that's a good question. So that's, in a way, it's a question about sort of how my claim would, to what extent it would sort of generalize, and whether it will generalize from intended wrongdoing to wrongdoing due to negligence or recklessness. And I guess so the answer I want to give is no, they're not responsible for murder. And this, this is because I think it's a sort of their actions it's not reckless or negligent, presumably, because it involves knowledge of risk, but it's a kind of risk that that we've decided to accept in society. So, but suppose that they were intentionally they intended this to, what was it, lead to heavy drinking or something like that. Yeah, suppose that they sort of intended this and adapted their policies and their sort of the recipe of the drink in certain ways to increase the probability that this result happened. Then I think it's a different case, and I'm still not sure exactly what to say, but I think there's just kind of, there are certain levels of risk that we as a society find acceptable because of the benefits it brings, and then it's not recklessness, or if it's not recklessness, negligence, and it's not intentional wrongdoing, then it's not murder or manslaughter either. Yeah. Thank you.
Is there a follow-up? Okay. The next question goes to Jojo Wufu.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks for your wonderful talk. I have some doubts on the non-manipulative influence, as you mentioned before. So imagine a case like this. So stranger, for whatever reason, perhaps gangster conflict, he wants to kill Muslim, and he made a great plan, very detailed plan, and he tries to pushing Muslim down to the trail while in the rushing hour in the metro. So as he planned the day, followed Muslim for a long time, know his routine, and making sure that Muslim will be there and given in a given moment and in a given train. So suddenly Omar rushed into the wagon, and it's Omar give a push accidentally to stranger, and then to Muslim, and then Muslim died. So I just want to know if in this case, the imagined case, if Muslim exerting any non-manipulative influence on Muslim's death. And also, I want to know what's the difference between, because in my imagined case, the D-Star well, that means the action plan for Muslim's death, stranger made a great plan. But in the proximal action, which directly caused Muslim's death, you can't say that he directly caused his death, right? It's more like an accident. So for me, the claim you argued for is not very much different from what I imagined in my case. So please do shed some light on this issue. And also, I doubt that maybe there's a quite high bar or high standard towards the issue, the non-manipulative influence. because I still want to know to what extent exactly can we say the responsibility attribution is as the same as the lone killer case. I don't know if I made myself clear, so please do share some light. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So let me see if I got the case you had right. The first. So Stringer has this detailed plan for getting Mousson killed, and he's gonna get Omar to push him down a staircase in the metro or something like that, so he dies. But then what happens is that, well, by telling him supposedly, and he does tell Omar to do this, and Omar does or plans to do it, but then actually what happens is that Stringer accidentally walks past and falls on Omar, who then sort of accidentally kills Mousson. Or no, I probably got this wrong. I'm really sorry. But what's the...
No, it's not my version. It's okay. Let me clarify again.
It's a case of sort of deviant causation. Is that the...
Right, it's exactly deviant causation, right?
Right. Okay. So what Stringer plans happens, but not exactly as he planned. Yeah. Right. So that's good. That's good. And what I've written on the handout doesn't really rule out that sort of case. Yeah, so I do think that there has to be a sort of non-deviance clause as well. So I accept your objection there. I mean, I should put that in. So I agree with that. But I don't think this will. I mean, that's very good, and you're right. But I think I can add the non-deviance kind of requirement, and it won't affect the argument, the sort of core argument, I think. And then, yeah, I'm sorry, you had a second point as well. Could you briefly repeat it?
Actually, it's never mind, because all I want to know, to be more specifically, is in the just as you said, the in the case like causation deviant.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, causation deviant case.
Yeah.
The stranger could might be stranger also exerting non-manipulative influence in such case. Because I do have, I do, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're perfectly right. I mean, I think even in the deviant causation cases, Stringer will be responsible for something, but yeah, I don't think he will be responsible for the killing. But it would be sort of, I think it would be perfectly analogous with a non-deviant version of lone killer. So, suppose he shoots the gun, he misses, but it scares a horde of pigs that runs over Mousson and kills him, or something like that. So it would be sort of the same. Whatever we say about that case, we should say about the non-manipulative influence case. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, it's a good thing that I hadn't thought about. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Jojo. I'm gonna read the next question from the chat box. Thank you for your lecture. My question is also about the differences between the original case and the case in your first response, the poison case. Shall we consider the morality of action itself? In the original case, Stringer just told Omar a fact, but in the poison case, Stringer put poison into Mouzon's food. Regardless of intention, these two actions seem quite different in morality. Besides, shall we consider which action is the direct cause of Mouzon's death? In the original case, it is Omar's action, while in the latter case, it is Stringer's action.
Yeah, good. So I think these are good questions, which bear on my claim, of course. So I think, I mean, insofar, so I think in the case of murder, I don't think there's much. I mean, with respect to the moral badness of murder, I don't think there's much difference between, doing it by telling someone a fact, intending that it's gonna cause them to kill someone, and putting poison in someone's food. But you might think that of course, if someone sort of brutally beats someone to death, for example, suppose that this is what Omar did, then that will reveal something about the character and the quality of will and the sort of things that Omar is willing to do, which will certainly be relevant for how we evaluate Omar as an agent, and perhaps telling someone a truth, even if you intend it to lead to someone's death, doesn't reveal the same kind of brutality that Omar, in this case, would sort of reveal in beating someone to death. So yes, so my question is, yes, I think the way the proximal action is carried out can certainly be relevant for our moral evaluation of the actions. So I want to acknowledge that, but these are sort of contingent facts about how Omar kills Mouzon, and whether it's a kind of action that reveals a kind of brutality or not. So I still think that my claim holds true, but you're right that it will matter. So the proximal action is sort of important because it can have consequences for how we morally evaluate the second agent. So yeah, that's a good question, and yeah, I think you're right that there can be these important differences.
Great. Thank you for the answer. Thanks for the response. All right. I will read one more from the chat box, again by River Chen. I'm interested in that whether the argument can extend to a person's character building or a longer time scale. For example, supposing a teacher repeatedly insulted a student and left a significant influence on him. Let's say that maybe he becomes aggressive, then 20 years later, he killed someone. Can the responsibility be traced back to his teacher?
Right. Good. Yeah, that's also this kind of issue of how my claim, the scope of my claim, and what sort of cases it can hold regarding. So I mean, I think so. This, in a way, it's similar to the Coca-Cola company producing the drinks case, or somewhat similar in that it's a very kind of very indirect causal chain. There's no intention here. Presumably the teacher hasn't any intent and can't foresee that 20 years later this person will kill someone. So I would say no, but of course, well, yeah. So if the teacher can foresee that that the student, if it's reasonable that the student will become aggressive and you know, and they repeatedly insult the student in a reckless or intentional way, then I do think that the teacher can be responsible for the student becoming aggressive. Although, I mean, I think what result you get from repeatedly insulting someone can vary a lot. So, you know, I'm not sure whether actually the teacher would be responsible for the student becoming aggressive. But my answer is no in this case. So it will depend on the foreseeability here. And I mean, I got this question about how to quantify this, and I realized that it's a bit unsatisfying not to get a sort of more precise answer. But this seems to be a case where the foreseeability is sort of too low for responsibility to be transmitted. Thank you.
Great. There's a follow-up question on the Coca-Cola question, which is, what is the difference between reckless negligence and intentional wrongdoing? It seems to me that, quote unquote, Coca-Cola's knowing that high probability of risk, unquote, is the same as Stringer's knowing Omar will kill. Right.
I see. Yeah. Right. So it's true. That's. I mean, there might be a. It seems double effect principle. Yeah. Right. So I mean, except that I think that it's. I think it's plausible that Stringer can more reliably foresee that Omar will kill Mousson than Coca-Cola. Well, no, actually, that's not true. Sorry. Yeah, so you're right that there is a similarity in the foreseeability here. So perhaps with respect to this transmission of responsibility, there's not much of a difference. But I think that the quality of will, and I realized I didn't talk about that, or it's not on a handout, but I think the quality of will which the action of the first agent manifests through the agency of the other will make a big difference. So the fact that Coca-Cola doesn't intend to bring about what they foresee, it's just a side effect of, you know, they want to sell more Coca-Cola. That makes a moral difference. Whereas in the non-manipulative influence case, Stringer intends for Omar to kill Mousson. So yeah, as Jason Jung, is that how it's Jason Jung?
Jung, I think.
It seems Jung. Yeah, it's a kind of double effect principle. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a follow-up also to this sort of question. Let me put myself on the list. Yeah, it seems to me that almost all murders and all bad things are in some sense the result of people being revealed certain information on the news and them responding to that information, whether it's sort of people having twisted ideas and that's why they do like mass shootings, or in some sense, every bad act is basically a response to information, at least in part, that was revealed to them. And of course, nobody intended to, by revealing information, to cause these things, but it's definitely something that de dicto you could know that somewhere down the line, people will do bad things with this information. And I'm just wondering again whether this leads to kind of an inflation of responsibility, but maybe one more addition or additional worry, or just a question to you. Sometimes when bad things happen as a side effect of something that's overall justifiable, there are still residual duties of some sort. For example, to go there and apologize or something like that. So if you break into someone's house because you need to save someone and you need to get the health kit from the house, you should still apologize to breaking in, even though all things considered, it was justified. So I was wondering whether you're just comfortable with this kind of inflated distribution of responsibility, and what do you think about residual duties of this apology sort in these cases?
So let me just check that I get the residual duties thing. So suppose I somehow get you to steal a book from the library, but you do it freely, intentionally. I'm not cursing you. Is the question sort of whether I should, or suppose and I don't do that intending that you do that. I just kind of reveal that there is this book that I happen to know that you really like is in the library. You don't have a library card. I know you tend to steal books.
Or I'm thinking of, for example, news anchors. So news anchors probably know that by revealing information every day about the state of the country, at some point, they don't know who exactly day it will be, but they know at some point someone will take this information in the wrong way. If there's enough people hearing this information, one will do something bad on the causal basis of this. And are you comfortable with, you can foresee that this will happen sort of de dicto. You don't know the exact person, but you know someone de dicto will respond in these ways. So what do you say in these cases? Are you just comfortable with responsibility being attributed to the source of the information?
No, I'm not comfortable with that sort of inflation. But it's a good case. I mean, so I mean, I think the news anchor wouldn't be blameworthy because what they're doing is justified, even though they know that there are these risks. But of course, I've said that moral responsibility is this relation, and it's about being a potential candidate for blame or praise. So you might think that doesn't really respond to the worry that the news anchor would be more responsible for these things, even if they're not blameworthy. No, I acknowledge. I mean, I see that there is this problem, and I need to say something more about the sort of level of foreseeability and intent. And I think the de dicto, de re thing is also interesting. I haven't thought about that. That there might be some important difference there. Sorry, it's not a very, very satisfying, but I see the problem.
I also think, sorry, the last follow-up, I also think that even if you embrace this idea that people are justified in releasing information in the news anchor, let's say, but they're not blameworthy, it seems to me at least very plausible that the fact that they are responsible, albeit justified, basically places certain residual duties on them.
Yeah,
so
right,
to
right.
feel regret in some sense, or to be empathetic, or to release an apology, or something like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, that does seem right. Yeah, I have to think about this. It's a good, but yeah, I'm not comfortable with that sort of inflation. Yeah, I mean, one possibility would be to sort of simply say that responsibility comes in degrees, so that in these kind of cases, well, you will be to a very, very small degree responsible, and maybe you need to reach a certain threshold in order to acquire these residual obligations. But yeah, so I mean, that's one possibility. But although I've tended to think that moral responsibilities is a kind of discrete thing, that you're either more responsible or you're not, and then blameworthiness and praiseworthiness is something that comes in degrees. I somehow think that's a more natural way to think about it, but yeah, one possibility would be sort of to talk of moral responsibility itself as being a sort of relation that comes in degrees. Yeah, but yeah, but I was just thinking about what you said about residual duties. So I think even in the cases where there's a kind of strong foreseeability and intent and so on, it would be sort of odd that. So that's what I was thinking about in the library case. So suppose I get you to steal this library book, and you do it freely and intentionally. I'm responsible for your action, and suppose I intended for you to do it. It still seems so. It seems right to say that I'm more responsible in this case, but it seems a bit odd to say that I should, pay the library the fee or something like that. And this is, and here you have this kind of pie model kind of makes sense, right? We're not talking about an amount of blameworthiness, but an amount of money to be paid back. So yeah, so there my intuitions are actually kind of in line with this idea that you're the one who should pay the fee, which maybe doesn't make sense given what I've said, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, these are good problems, yeah, that I need to figure out.
Well, thanks for the answer. That's super interesting. Okay, let's keep going a little bit. There's another question in the chat box. I'm going to read it. Hi, thank you for the lecture. Does the moral responsibility for others' action decrease or increase with the change of the condition the agent gave? And are all statements in this lecture based on the view of libertarianism? What's the main impact if we take determinism into account when deal with questions about whether we are responsible for another agent's action?
So Rosalind, thanks for the question. So I take it that what you mean is with the conditions the agent gave. Do you mean I understand you to talk about the conditions for moral responsibility, what exactly those conditions are, which account. we accept, whether it's libertarianism or some kind of attributionism or some kind of reason responsiveness view. There are all these different views. Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and so I'll start with that. So yeah, so it will make a difference. I mean, the most obvious difference is the one I pointed out earlier, that for my claim to make sense, we have to accept moral outcome luck. So we have to accept that you can be responsible for more than, you know, your decisions and bodily movements and your quality of will or something like that, or your attitudes. So that's one obvious difference. And yeah, you might also think that if you, yeah, so well, my short answer is that yes, I think it will make some difference. But what I said in the lecture, I didn't intend it to depend on libertarianism. So I'm personally not a libertarian, but I wanted my argument to be to hold, even if you accept a sort of libertarian control condition on moral responsibility, so that if you don't have this uncaused free will, then you don't have more responsibility. So I'm actually a compatibilist. I mean, I don't know if the universe is deterministic or not, but I do think that we could be more responsible even if the universe is deterministic. And I think that my argument is even more kind of intuitive and plausible if one isn't a libertarian, actually. So if one is a compatibilist and if the universe is deterministic.
Great. Thanks for your answer. We have a few more minutes, so feel free to raise your hand or write more questions in the chat box. We probably have room for 2 more questions, I think. There's no question right now. I'm gonna put myself on the list again. So you've talked a lot about blame and moral responsibility in these cases, and I was wondering just whether you think there's a similar case that can be made for praise. So if I make information available and somebody else on the basis of that does something good or something praiseworthy, am I now also praiseworthy? How's this go?
Yeah, that's good. So I think this relates a bit to the question earlier about sort of to what extent the details of the proximate action matter. And I think it's in most cases of praiseworthiness, this proximate action really matters. So, you know, if you're an artist and I give you money to make a great work of art, and you're sort of praiseworthy for making this great work of art, I don't become praiseworthy for the, you know, making the artwork. And I think in a lot of cases it is like that. But so this is because I think in many of these praiseworthiness cases, praiseworthiness sort of depends on the skill of the agent that performs the action, or perhaps the sort of certain character traits of the agent, their courage or something like that. But so the kind of arithmetic judgments. But I do think that suppose I sort of convince you to suppose you're very rich and I don't have money, but I reason with you and convince you to put your great monetary resources to a very good cause or something, which you otherwise wouldn't do or something. Then it seems more plausible to say that, you know, I could be praiseworthy for bringing about that donation that you make or something like that. Although I have to say that my intuitions are sort of less, they are less clear in the praiseworthiness cases, and I'm not sure why exactly, to be honest. But it's a very good question. I mean, in some cases, I think it has to do with this, like, that particular kinds of skills or virtues are required. But, you know, yeah, suppose, yeah, you're rich and you're not actually very generous, but through my, like, persuasion, I nevertheless convince you to donate all this money in a very generous way. Then, yeah, I'm more responsible for what you did, and I can be praiseworthy for that. That seems possible. Yeah.
Thank you. We have, do we have another question, another hand? It's not look like it, but we have a few more minutes left. And if there's no question, I will just ask another one.
Yeah. Sure.
But I want to give others a chance to also raise your hand. If I see another hand, I will give you the floor, but I don't see one right now. It's just a clarificatory question.
Yeah.
So when I indirectly cause something by way of an immediate intermediary causal link,
yeah,
then I am responsible. And the case, when you compare these cases where there's simply a machine or something, some non-agent causal link in between, and the cases where there is an agent in the causal link, for you, they're exactly the same cases. You would say, yeah, the initial or the first agent in the relevant chain that we're looking at is in both cases equally as morally responsible. So is it right that you embrace that the fact that there is an agent in between and not just a thing makes literally no difference?
Yes, that's right. I mean, it doesn't make any difference in itself, right? So but I do think that there is this connect. Yeah, so I do think that there's something right about this idea that if there's an agent, the causal chain will generally be more sensitive, which makes for less foreseeability. So often it will indirectly make a difference, but yes, that's right. So in itself, I don't think it makes any difference that there is this, there's an agent rather than a machine. Yeah. Even if the agent is a libertarian free agent. Yeah, that's right.
Well, great. Yeah, Ola, thank you. Thank you for.
So your voice kind of cut out, but
wonderful talk. I think we're back. Am I back?
Yeah,
I
now
can't
you're back.
see your picture. I can see you move. Okay, I'm back. Great. So thank you for your talk, for this wonderful talk, this engaging talk. Thank you for all the interesting answers. Thanks for the audience for showing up so numerously and for asking all these interesting questions as well. So we had a nice conversation. I really thought it was a really good experience for all of us. So on behalf of the entire audience, I want to thank Professor Ole Blomberg once again on behalf of all. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions, and you've really sort of pinpointed some important things I can think about. So this is really beneficial for me as well. Great questions, and yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Great. Lovely to have you, and I hope to see you at some point again for another talk at PKU. All right.
Great. Yeah. Hope to see you all soon.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.